Hey everybody, this is Minion Soldier, and an interesting little game that you can play with the background footage in this video is, can you figure out the point that I actually fell asleep playing Star Citizen? That isn't a dig against the game. That's not me going like, Star Citizen sucks. But what had happened was the night before I had been up till like 1 a.m. and then I had to wake up to drive somebody at the airport or to the airport at 4 o'clock in the morning. So by the time we got to, I'm in an org called Scum, and by the time we had gotten to our usual Saturday Star Citizen game, I was completely zonked, and I literally passed out while we were playing the game. So interesting part of the footage. Can you figure out at what point did I did I fall asleep? But Drake Corsair. Drake Corsair is the reason why we're here today. Drake Corsair is what we're going to talk about because a lot of people are very excited about this ship, and for obvious reasons. Now, when a ship like this gets mentioned by CIG and they do say, oh, well, we're not currently working on it. Oh man, why aren't they working on it? I tend to agree. They have most of the Drake tile set, if you will, completed. Pretty much every other Drake ship has built the assets for this ship, though there's obviously unique hull geometry involved. A lot of the little things, a lot of the little touches that I would argue probably eat up most of the production time to make a ship like this flyable have already been completed on the litany of flyable Drake ships. And with the game expanding towards a new solar system and travel going over much longer distances, a ship like this is obviously going to be in a lot of demand. And frankly, when CIG was talking about it's often a struggle to find the right people who are free at the right times to kind of get a ship together, but I would argue that the Drake Corsair is probably one of the most pre-together ships, the pre-assembled ships that they have lined up right now. I think that this is kind of low-hanging fruit, so I do hold out some hope that this is going to see an earlier production date. Now, if you look at the roadmap, you'll notice it's a very, very weird thing that you're seeing on the roadmap, where it's like, it's next patch 4 or 5 ships, the next patch after that 3 ships, and then after that only 1 with the Hercules. That's a little bit weird. Now, when things like this get mentioned, of course, there are a few people who occasionally get in touch with me and they say, do you know something? You mentioned it. Do you know something? Occasionally I do know things. Occasionally I do know things that I can't directly say because I want to make sure that the policy that lets me find out these things continues to remain in practice, and I'll leave it at that. So in this case, I don't know something. This is purely speculation, and I'm going to say that right off the bat. This is purely me looking at the roadmap, listening to what's going on in the community, listening to what CIG is saying, and thinking they are going to try to shoehorn this in sooner rather than later. I would honestly, at this point, I would honestly be shocked if we didn't find out at some point this year coming up, 2020, that the Corsair has not gone into production. I would personally be shocked. I think that we are going to find this out sooner rather than later, that the Corsair is being pushed into production. The roadmap kind of tells me this. My gut feeling tells me this, but I have not heard anything direct that has confirmed this. And of course, CIG has flat out stated that they are not currently producing this, but I do have a feeling, and I want to be clear that it's not like, ooh, there's a secret going on behind the scenes. I look at the roadmap, I hear what CIG is saying, and how they're looking for kind of like low-hanging fruit. I feel that this is a popular ship, it is low-hanging fruit, and they are going to go after this sooner rather than later and try to get it done. Many times in the past, when talking about the Drake Corsair, I have kind of advocated for taking the side turrets, the two side-facing turrets that you can see here, taking them out, taking the 4 guns from there and placing them basically right there in the center of the ship. You can see the little hatch right in between them. Placing a quad turret right up there and basically making those guns more useful. That is something that I have advocated for because it isn't a major change to hull geometry. I think it would overall improve the ship. However, while I do think that it would make the ship better, if someone were to say to me, and a few people have, that, you know, the Corsair has got a heck of a lot of forward-facing firepower. A heck of a lot of forward-facing firepower. And this may be CIG's way to kind of tamp things down a little bit. And you know what? The side guns, it's going to be very hard to get a player to want to sit there because they're probably not going to see a lot of use out of them. But if you have a crew of NPCs and you want to stick at least a couple of NPCs into those turrets to more or less guard your flanks while you're flying around, they may not be the worst things to have there. They could certainly push a ship that's trying to circle around you towards the rear where the rear turret can engage them and otherwise make attacking you from the sides a little bit more difficult. So while it is a change that I recommend, it isn't a change that is a make or break thing for me. Because I want to say this, you know, as clearly as I can. I do believe that this is the next step up from the Cutlass, and the Cutlass is a broadly enjoyed ship across the community, and I think that this is going to be that next ship. I honestly do. I think that this is going to be one of the big ships in the Star Citizen lineup in that next tier up size, especially when we're talking about going to another solar system or even beyond that in the future. I think that the Corsair has got a very bright future ahead of it, even as it is. But I think that, you know, when I'm recommending a change like this, it doesn't represent a major change to the geometry of the hull, and that's kind of why I feel justified in recommending this. Now, there have been some threads in Reddit and whatnot that people have kind of pointed me towards and said, hey, this is about the Corsair. What do you think about this? And I wanted to discuss one of these in particular and show it because I want to kind of try and explain, you know, where I kind of draw the line when I recommend changes to a ship. So this kind of conceptual reimagining was posted on Reddit by a guy named Sir Berticus. And I have to say that the whole geometry that he's displaying is something that as soon as I saw, I went like, oh, that's sexy. I like that. It does kind of solve that issue when you're looking at the Drake Corsair, certainly when it's parked. One sec, let me put up an image of that as well. There it is. Okay, so you might think, and he, you know, there's some justifications that he places in his Reddit thread, and I'll put a link in the description, you know, below, as long as I remember. And you know, justifications like it might be difficult to land it in certain landing areas and stuff like that. I do want to say that, you know, the whole geometry that he displays with these wings, the way they are, I really like this. I really do like this as a kind of a reimagining of the ship. And this, I want to be honest, this would be a model of the Drake Corsair that I would like to see. But you know, I can't recommend it, and I can't get behind it and say, yes, do this thing right now. I like it. I really, really do like it. But especially when you're talking to fans of Drake ships, you have to be really, really careful when you put stuff out there like this or recommend things like this, because even though it might appeal to me, there's a lot of people out there that it may not appeal to, and since it doesn't really change gameplay in a way that benefits the player, ultimately I can't recommend it, because even though I do like this redesign, I have to be honest, it also brings to mind another Drake situation. The Drake Herald, as originally concepted and sold to us, you know, you might look at that picture and say, oh, that's not the Herald. That was the Herald. That was an asymmetrical Herald. That was what was originally sold to the community. And there were quite a few pilots out there who embraced it and who thought, oh, that's really great. Now, of course, there were also a number of people in the community who was like, asymmetrical ships don't make sense. The physics doesn't work. You should get rid of that ship right now, make it symmetrical. But, you know, leave the scythe the way it is because we actually like that one. But I don't like this one, so you have to change it for all the people who bought it. You know, that kind of horseshit. So I can't support flipping a ship's geometry so drastically once you've already sold it, right? And in truth, I mean, the benefits of the landing pad that the guy kind of mentions, I would argue that you would have to make that other wing tilt up as well. Otherwise, you might be a little bit too wide on one side. So, you know, but ultimately, is it something that we're going to see? Probably not. And there's a number of reasons why. And there's a number of justifications that people might make. They might say like, oh, you know, if CIG used a player, you know, created redesigns of their ships, then they'd have to pay that person royalties. And they're not going to do that. And I would kind of counter argue that I think that if CIG went to the guy who created this redesign and said, listen, here's what we're willing to do. We would like to take this and put it into the game as a variant of the current Corsair. And, you know, maybe we'll say that's an antenna for E-War. It sacrifices its exploration capabilities that the current Corsair has for an E-War suite instead. And that's the antenna for the E-War suite. And we're willing to bring this into the game. We just want you to sign away your rights to what you did. And, you know, because arguably they came up with the other 99% of it, and this person just reorganized one of the wings. We're willing to give you a free one with LTI and let you pick from an approved list of names the name of the ship. And I think most players put in that situation would be like, hell yeah, absolutely. Maybe even throw in a custom paint job, question mark. So I don't really think that that would be a big thing to hold the thing back. And of course, if they actually did do that and made it like an E-War variant, very, very tempting. Very, very tempting for yours truly. But ultimately, while I do love the design, I can't support changing a ship's hull geometry after you've already sold it, especially when it is not in a way that directly benefits the player through gameplay. I mean, the argument for landing pads, I think, is kind of a little weak, and I do really like the way the Corsair looks as well currently. But I would fully endorse CIG coming out as, they like to do the flight ready ships and they like to bring these things out. I would fully endorse this as a variant to the current Corsair with the addition of a top turret. Yeah, I would totally get behind this. And the reason is, of course, the same reason that I said that I feel that the Corsair is going to come up fairly soon for production. Because when you look at certainly the concept images, you start to clue into the fact that they've already done a lot of the work. Now, you may be familiar with these concept images here. These were the less known concept images. When you go to the ship on the website, you see, of course, the big flashy art that I showed earlier in the video. But you may not be as familiar with these shots of the interior. Now, it kind of looks a little gray boxy. It doesn't look very finished up, but you have to remember that a lot of the work that goes into the interior of a Drake ship has already been done. Even this unique cockpit configuration that you see here, it very much borrows heavily from both the Caterpillar and the Cutlass. And so even though it is something very new and very unique, and some people might say, well, that's going to be some of the heavy lifting in building the ship, I would argue that a lot of that is a path that they've already tread across, so it would be very easy for them to kind of implement that in a new ship. This is a concept image from the Corsair, and you'll recognize this is the lunchroom. Those are the crew quarters there off to the left. You may look at this and say, oh, I'm not as familiar with this image. You'll see that a lot of this is borrowed directly, like the table and the monitors above the table. That's borrowed almost directly from the Caterpillar. And a lot of the tiles, a lot of the little components, a lot of that heavy lifting that goes into making a ship flight ready has already been done on the previous Drake ships. So I really do think that this is something that they could implement very, very quickly, and it would not represent a great deal of hardship for them to produce a flyable Corsair. So that's kind of why I do think that we are going to see this. You know, that is kind of my fully formed, thought out justification for why we are going to see the Corsair sooner rather than later, though I have to reiterate that no one has said anything to me that has pointed me in that direction other than supposition. I have received nothing as direct evidence that this is something that is going to happen. This is entirely speculation, but I think it's good speculation because, to me, at least, it seems like kind of a smart move and a bit of a no-brainer. Now, recently, I'm not sure if I put it in the video because, once again, I don't have a script to refer back to. You know, part of the drawbacks of doing things kind of freeform like this. But, you know, recently we were talking about the Redeemer. And I know that I made these comments privately, but once again, I'm not sure if I made them, you know, publicly in one of my videos. But I theorized that it could be entirely possible that when CIG was talking about doing a little reconcept work on the Redeemer, that maybe the Ares is the reconcepted Redeemer. You know, I made these comments privately. I'm making them publicly now. But once again, this is distant speculation. This is what I call the long shot. This is, you know, it could be this. It could be this as one of a multitude of possibilities. I'm not saying for sure that I think it is, but this is one of the multitude of possibilities. And that is what I would call much more distant speculation. Whereas, you know, something like this that we're talking about with the Corsair, I think is a little bit more sensible. When we're looking at the ever-expanding universe of Star Citizen and the demands of the player community for ships that are going to be much more adept at traveling those great distances, and even as you're seeing here in this image, delivering vehicles to those locations and doing all the things that we want them to do, ships that kind of open up a plethora of possibilities to us as players rather than ships that almost, you know, conspire against our ambitions. You know, much smaller ships like fighters, you'll see a lot of people kind of going like, I don't know so much about fighters anymore, or those small ships. I'm now looking towards these bigger ships. I think you're going to see a lot more demand and a lot more interest in ships of this class, ships that aren't quite capitals, but at the same time, they don't suffer the limitations of fighters. Those ships that are stuck in the middle, I think, are going to become ever increasingly more popular within the game. And I do think that this is the next step up from the Cutlass for a lot of people. And there's a lot of people who have a lot of interest in seeing this ship, you know, brought to fruition in the game. And there's going to be a lot of reasons within the game to prioritize a ship like this. And that's why I think that we are going to see it sooner rather than later. So with that being said, those are my current thoughts and beliefs in regards to where the Corsair is going to go. Once again, I have not received anything directly that has pointed me to this. This is entirely speculation. But unlike what I was saying with the Redeemer just a moment ago, I think that this is fairly logical speculation and fairly likely to be the outcome. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching. CIG Corsair 2020, please. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. So if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42's development, please follow us on our social media channels. See you soon.